I had a dream. In my previous life, Cassian and I were husband and wife. We spent our entire lives together and passed away together at the age of 80, growing old side by side in the truest sense. Now, I looked at the man sleeping beside me, Caleb, my husband in this life, and Cassian's closest friend and business partner. I remembered that a year ago, I was supposed to go on a blind date with Cassian. Instead, he introduced me to his best friend. Chapter 1. When I woke up from the dream, my memories drifted back to a year earlier. I had just graduated from college and started my first job as a middle school Chinese teacher. Everyone knows that being a female teacher is considered one of the most desirable professions for marriage. Not long after I became a full-time teacher, my enthusiastic grade director found out I didn't have a boyfriend and immediately offered to set me up. He guaranteed that the man was outstanding in every way. He's my nephew. He graduated from a top university. He's tall, handsome, and right after graduation he started a company with his classmates. He's capable, talented, and truly one in a million. Jane, I've worked with you for a while now. You're not only beautiful, but also gentle, polite, and an excellent teacher. That's why I wanted to introduce you to someone in my own family. Cassian has incredibly high standards. I don't just set him up with anyone. It's because you're so exceptional that I can't bear the thought of someone else sweeping you off your feet. I'd regret it so much I'd lose sleep over it. Just do me this favor and meet him once. If you don't like him, just tell me honestly, and I'll finally give up on the idea. Fresh out of college, I was still too timid to refuse people. In the end, I could only grit my teeth and agree. Director Sam's nephew was named Cassian. He added me on WeChat, greeted me politely, introduced himself, and asked if I had any preference for where we should meet. To keep things simple, I picked a restaurant near my school. The meeting turned out to be awkward. When I arrived at the private dining room, there were already 3 people inside. 2 handsome men and 1 stunningly beautiful woman. The man on the left wore a dress shirt and slacks. He looked refined and gentle. The man on the right had neatly cropped hair and carried himself with quiet confidence. The moment I saw the man on the right, I hesitated, because I recognized him. He was Cassian. Director Sam had shown me his photo before, but now, the Cassian I was supposed to meet had his arm resting casually around the beautiful woman's shoulders. She leaned against him intimately. The two were obviously more than just friends. I couldn't understand it. If Cassian already had a girlfriend, why had he agreed to go on a blind date with me? And why bring both his girlfriend and another man along? I felt deeply insulted. Without another word, I turned to leave. Miss Jane, could you please give me a chance to explain? A voice called from behind me. I turned around. Cassian stood up, walked over, and gave me a respectful bow. First of all, I'd like to sincerely apologize. Please believe me, I wasn't trying to make a fool of you. I came here with complete sincerity as well, but the one who's here for the blind date isn't me. He pointed to the formally dressed man beside him. It's my friend, Caleb. I've always had a mild temper and rarely got angry. Seeing how genuinely apologetic he was, I decided to stay and hear him out. Chapter 2. Cassian explained that he already had a girlfriend and had told his aunt, Director Sam, about her. But Director Sam was convinced he was only making excuses to avoid another blind date. Even after he sent her a photo of himself with his girlfriend, she refused to believe him. You can't really blame my aunt, Cassian said with a wry smile. Back when she kept setting me up, I actually lied about having a girlfriend. I even photoshopped myself into a random girl's picture. Now that I really do have one, she won't believe me. He introduced Caleb to me, his college roommate, his closest friend, and now his business partner. According to Cassian, Caleb was even more outstanding than he was. In college, Caleb had been completely devoted to his studies and had never dated anyone. The day his aunt sent him my photo, he was about to turn her down again, but Caleb happened to see the picture. Cassian said Caleb had fallen for me at first sight and begged him to introduce us. Love at first sight? I looked at the man sitting across from me with obvious skepticism. The moment he noticed my gaze, the tips of his ears turned bright red. After a brief pause, as if gathering every ounce of courage, he stood up and bowed to me. I'm sorry, Miss Jane, for meeting you in such an abrupt way, but I truly wanted the chance to get to know you. Would you let me pursue you? I was completely stunned. When I finally came to my senses, I turned around and ran. I chickened out. I honestly had no idea how to deal with a situation like that. As I rushed toward the roadside without thinking, a speeding motorcycle came straight at me. My body froze. I couldn't move. Just as the motorcycle was about to hit me, someone shoved me out of the way. I turned around and saw the look of pain on Caleb's face. A long gash had been torn across his arm by the motorcycle, and blood was pouring from the wound. Panicked, I rushed him to the hospital. As the doctor cleaned and dressed the injury, even I couldn't bear to watch. Despite the excruciating pain, Caleb still did his best to comfort me in a gentle voice. "It's okay. It's just a flesh wound. It'll heal soon." Looking into the tenderness in his eyes, I found myself beginning to believe that maybe he really had fallen for me at first sight. After all, very few people would risk their own lives to save someone they'd only just met. In a situation like that, Caleb had pushed me away purely on instinct. In a situation like today, the way Caleb pushed me away was completely an instinctive reaction. The fact that he injured only his arm was purely a matter of luck. It was obvious that he truly cared about me. Chapter 3. After he had saved my life, it didn't feel right to keep treating him like a stranger. Caleb and I exchanged contact information. From that day on, he began pursuing me wholeheartedly. Every morning, he'd be waiting downstairs with breakfast in hand, then drive me to school. In the evening, he'd be there on time to pick me up and take me home. During the day, he'd occasionally send me a joke, or casually update me on what he was doing, whether I replied or not. To be honest, it's hard for a single woman not to be moved when an outstanding man is genuinely pursuing her, and Caleb truly was exceptional. He was handsome, graduated from a top university, and was intelligent and well-read. The company he had started with his college friends was still in its early stages, but it was already on the right track and turning a profit. He was, without a doubt, a promising young entrepreneur. On top of that, he was polite, gentle, thoughtful, and considerate. No matter what we talked about, he could always keep the conversation flowing. Being with him felt effortless, comfortable, warm, and reassuring. The moment I finally decided to give him a chance came when my grandfather suddenly fell ill. I was having dinner with Caleb when my mom called to say Grandpa had collapsed. On the way to my parents' house, Caleb stayed by my side, gently calming my nerves. We arrived at the same time as the ambulance, and he came with me to the hospital. During Grandpa's stay, Caleb visited him whenever he could. He would carefully help Grandpa from the bed into a wheelchair, then take him downstairs for walks in the hospital garden. Grandpa's hearing wasn't very good, but Caleb never lost his patience. He listened attentively, one sentence at a time. By the time Grandpa was discharged, he was already affectionately calling him Kale, and just like that, Caleb and I became a couple. Everything between us progressed naturally, and I found myself falling deeper into the happiness of being in love. Whenever I came across something funny or interesting, he was the first person I wanted to share it with. Even though we saw each other almost every day, I'd still wake up each morning excited at the thought that he'd already be waiting downstairs. At lunchtime, I'd find myself itching to call him, just to hear his voice. Even after saying goodbye downstairs at night, we'd start a video call the moment I got to my room and chat until we fell asleep. That's when I finally understood what people meant by, "I miss you" the moment we part. Whenever I went shopping with friends and passed a men's clothing store, I'd instinctively stop to see if there was anything that would look good on him. It felt as though another person had quietly become part of my life, and instead of feeling strange, it made everything sweeter. Chapter 4. Less than a year after meeting Caleb, we got married. It never felt too soon. Everything just seemed to fall naturally into place. His parents adored me, and my family loved him just as much. On New Year's Day, he teamed up with my family and friends to plan an unforgettable proposal. Without a second of hesitation, I said yes. Both of our families and friends were overjoyed and sincerely wished us a lifetime of happiness. That included director Sam and Cassian. Cassian came to the proposal that day, though the girlfriend by his side was no longer the one I'd met before. When director Sam heard I was marrying Caleb, she spent the entire day sighing and scolding her nephew for being blind enough to let such a wonderful woman slip away. Even so, she congratulated me wholeheartedly. She said Caleb was truly an exceptional man and that Cassian simply wasn't lucky enough. Caleb and I entered marriage while still deeply in love. After we got married, we got along wonderfully and never once had a serious argument. Our passionate romance didn't fade after marriage. Instead, it turned into countless little moments of warmth woven into our everyday lives. Whenever we disagreed about something, Caleb would always give in to me without hesitation. One evening after dinner, I insisted on going out for a walk. Caleb said the weather forecast predicted rain later, but I'd eaten a little too much that day and stubbornly wanted to go anyway. I even pointed at the clear blue sky and insisted there was no way it would rain. Instead of arguing with me, Caleb simply smiled and asked gently, "You really want to go that badly?" I nodded eagerly. "All right, I'll go with you." He patted my head. About half an hour after we left, thunder rumbled overhead. Moments later, rain came pouring down. Caleb immediately pulled a black folding umbrella from the backpack he had been carrying, opened it, wrapped an arm around me, and walked me home. When we got back, I saw that his entire back was soaked. I felt terrible. "Go take a hot shower first," he said, gently guiding me toward the bathroom. "You don't want to catch a cold." "I'll get your pajamas." I sniffled. "Caleb, why don't you ever blame me? I was the one being stubborn. I ignored your advice, insisted on going out, and ended up getting you drenched. You were right all along. Why don't you take the opportunity to lecture me?" He smiled, pinched my nose lightly, and said, "It's no big deal. Besides, I brought an umbrella. I knew we'd be fine." He looked at me with the same gentle smile as always. "I wasn't going to let a single raindrop touch you." Sometimes I couldn't help wondering, had I saved Caleb's life in my previous life? Otherwise, why would he treat me so unbelievably well? Chapter 5. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I could make out the face beside me. Caleb had thick eyebrows and a sharp, well-defined nose. And his eyes, they were beautiful, dark, round, like black grapes. I wondered if our child would inherit those features someday. Our child? The thought hit me like a bolt of lightning. Earlier today, I'd taken time off work to go to the hospital for a checkup. 28 days pregnant. I was pregnant. Caleb and I were going to have a baby. The memories from my dream, my entire previous life, had been so overwhelming that I'd completely forgotten something so important. I still remembered how excited I'd been when I received the test results that afternoon. But when Caleb came to pick me up after work, I forced myself to keep it a secret. His birthday was only 2 days away. I wanted to tell him then and give him the biggest surprise of his life. Without realizing it, my thoughts drifted back to my previous life. In that lifetime, when Cassian and I got married, we also had a child, a son. We raised him with all our love, and eventually he took over his father's business. The year Cassian and I passed away, our grandson was already in high school. No matter how I looked at it, our life together had been happy and complete. The reason I believed that dream was actually my previous life was simple. It was too complete. It showed me an entire lifetime. Every detail remained crystal clear in my mind, as if I'd truly lived through it. The dream had felt so real, from my blind date with Cassian, to falling in love, getting married, and growing old together. None of it felt imagined. It felt like my own memories. I couldn't believe it had been nothing more than a bizarre dream. No dream could possibly be that detailed. I could clearly remember every piece of furniture in the home Cassian and I had shared. I remembered exactly how many cars we owned, their brands, their colors, even their license plate numbers. I remembered the year our son was born, his name, and exactly what he looked like. No ordinary dream could contain that much detail. So if that truly had been my previous life, why was everything different this time? Why hadn't Cassian and I ended up together? Why had I fallen in love with Caleb instead? After thinking it over for a long time, I could only come to one conclusion. One of them, either Cassian or Caleb, had been reborn, or somehow remembered our previous life. Whoever it was had changed something on the day of that blind date. That single choice had set fate on a different course. And from that moment on, the lives of all three of us had been rewritten. "Why are you still awake?" The man beside me slowly opened his eyes. "Can't sleep?" Chapter 6. I've always thought Caleb was a light sleeper. The slightest sound would wake him. Every time I got up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom, or even just turned over in bed, he'd wake up too. Now. He wrapped an arm tightly around me, his warm breath brushing against my neck. It was the familiar comfort and intimacy that always made me feel safe. I couldn't help but relax. No, I just had a dream. And it woke me up. A nightmare? He asked. Not exactly. I thought about it for a moment. It was just a very long, very realistic dream. He gently stroked my hair, his movements slow and soothing. Then you should get some sleep. You have 4 classes in a row tomorrow morning. That's going to wear you out. He remembered my teaching schedule even better than I did. I couldn't help comparing him to Cassian. Had Cassian treated me this well in my previous life? Not really. During the first few years of our relationship, we had been deeply in love. But after we got married, everything gradually settled into routine. Cassian was a bit of a traditional husband. He never did any housework. Fortunately, after his company took off, his success allowed us to hire a live-in housekeeper. So chores were never a source of conflict between us. Most days, we each focused on our own work before coming home to have dinner together in the evening. As a middle school teacher, I didn't earn much, but he never asked me to quit my job or become a stay-at-home wife. I stayed in my profession until the day I retired. As the years passed, our marriage grew quieter and steadier. Ironically, after we grew old, we spent more time together than ever before, finding comfort in simply sharing each day. I remembered that in the year we died, we still held hands whenever we went out for our evening walks. Cassian had never been the romantic type. He hadn't even proposed. After dating for 2 years, we decided over dinner that we should get married. The next day, we went to register our marriage. He never surprised me with carefully chosen gifts. Either. On Valentine's Day and our anniversaries, it was always the same, a bouquet of roses and a designer handbag. A few years into marriage, even those disappeared. Eventually, we stopped celebrating anniversaries altogether. Fortunately, I had never cared much about grand romantic gestures. I'd always believed that a happy marriage didn't need constant fanfare. An ordinary, peaceful life was enough. I'd never once argued with him over gifts. Caleb was completely different. He cared deeply about making special moments memorable. He planned our wedding himself, pouring his heart into every little detail. He even secretly learned the choreography to my favorite boy band's dance. At the wedding, he performed it with his friends as a surprise just for me. I used to think I didn't care about romance. I thought surprises weren't important to me. But every little surprise Caleb prepared filled me with genuine happiness. Not because of the gifts themselves, but because I could feel how much thought, sincerity, and love he had poured into them. Wrapped in Caleb's arms, quietly listening to our heartbeats in the darkness, I suddenly realized I didn't want to dwell on it anymore. I didn't want to find out who had changed the course of this lifetime. Chapter 7. Whoever had quietly set fate on a different course and changed the lives of the 3 of us no longer mattered. What difference would knowing make? If it had been Cassian, then perhaps the happiness I'd felt in our previous life had only existed in my own heart. This time, he simply didn't want to spend his life with me. If that was the case, I would respect his choice and let him go. I had nothing to resent. And if it had been Caleb, then perhaps he'd secretly loved me in our previous life but had hidden his feelings well. In this life, he loved me so wholeheartedly that I truly felt cherished. What reason would I have to blame him? My mother once described my personality perfectly. She said I looked gentle, soft-spoken, and delicate, the kind of woman who seemed to need someone to protect her. But underneath, I was resilient, adaptable, and remarkably good at making peace with whatever life brought me. Maybe it was simply my instinct to hold on to what made me happy. My life now was peaceful. I was surrounded by love and security. I didn't want to destroy that. So I made my decision. The past belonged in the past. If I'd been given another chance at life and ended up living the same life all over again, I wouldn't have minded. But now that everything had changed, experiencing a completely different life wasn't such a bad thing either. 2 days later, it was Caleb's birthday. That evening, I left work early and prepared a lavish dinner with the housekeeper. When Caleb walked through the door and saw the table filled with food and a birthday cake, he smiled and wrapped me in a hug. Wow, you really went all out. Of course. I laughed. I know how much you love special occasions. I was afraid you'd sulk if I didn't make a proper effort. Nonsense. He looked offended. Do I seem that petty? Oh. I laughed harder. I wonder who it was that acted like nothing was wrong after his wife had to work late and missed his birthday dinner, then secretly sulked all day long the next day. Definitely wasn't me, he answered with a perfectly straight face. After dinner, Caleb made a wish and blew out the candles. The two of us shared a slice of cake before curling up together on the living room sofa. He cleared his throat. So, has someone forgotten something? I know, I smiled. Wait here, I'll go get your present. I'd hidden my ultrasound report inside a beautifully wrapped gift box, keeping it behind my back. I slowly walked back into the living room. Just as I was about to hand it to him, I noticed him staring blankly at the plate of snacks on the coffee table. What's this? He asked, looking oddly distracted. Oh, cranberry cookies. I ordered them online. They're really good. Want to try one? They had been one of my favorite snacks in my previous life. It was a small, relatively unknown brand. Yesterday morning, I suddenly remembered them, searched for them online, and placed an order. I hadn't expected them to arrive so quickly. Caleb picked one up and took a bite. You're right. They are really good. Forget the cookies. I handed him the gift box. Look what I got you. But even then, he still seemed distracted. I pouted. Caleb, don't tell me you don't want your birthday present anymore. Huh? Oh. He finally accepted the box and slowly opened it. When he saw the paper inside, confusion flashed across his face. Then his eyes widened. He looked up at me in disbelief. Jane, this. You really. He became so overwhelmed that he could barely get the words out. I smiled and nodded. Caleb, you're going to be a dad. Are you happy? Without warning, he swept me into his arms and spun me around before pulling me into a tight embrace. Thank you, Jane. His voice cracked. I'm so happy. This is the best birthday present I've ever received. A moment later, I felt hot tears land against my neck. Caleb, are you crying? I tried to look up at him. No way. You're seriously this emotional? Instead, he held me even tighter, not letting me move. Yeah. His voice trembled. I'm just too happy. Jane, I promise I'll do everything I can to be a good father. Chapter 8. Throughout my pregnancy, Caleb treated me like I was made of glass. If anything, he was overly cautious. When I reached the final trimester and my belly had grown huge, he cautiously suggested that I start my maternity leave early. I refused. The semester is almost over. They can't suddenly replace a teacher for several classes now. It would be difficult for the school, and I don't want to let my students down. Caleb respected my decision. Instead, he began waiting outside the school every single day, terrified that I might go into labor at any moment. Perhaps because either he or Cassian had memories of a previous life. The company they founded together developed much faster this time around. The blockbuster game that had originally been released 2 years later was launched half a year ago instead. Just like in my previous life, it became an instant hit the moment it was released. The company was already preparing to go public, years ahead of its original timeline. So whenever I told Caleb to stop worrying so much and go back to work, he'd grin smugly and say, I'm the boss. Nobody tells me what to do. Besides, I've already made enough money for us to live comfortably for the rest of our lives. The delivery wasn't easy. After more than 20 hours of labor, I finally gave birth to our daughter. I'd screamed for so long that my voice was completely hoarse. The moment I came out of the delivery room and saw Caleb, tears poured down my face. He kissed my hand over and over, his own voice rough with emotion. Don't cry. We're never doing this again. I'll never let you go through something like this again. At our daughter's 1-month celebration, Cassian refused to let go of her after picking her up. He kept insisting he wanted to be her godfather. Seeing how attached he was, someone nearby teased him. If you love kids that much, why don't you hurry up, get married, and have one of your own? Cassian pulled the woman beside him into his arms and flashed a mischievous grin. Come on, let's go make a baby. The woman instantly blushed bright red. You're impossible. Once again, Cassian had a different girlfriend. Ever since I'd met him in this life, he'd been constantly changing partners. I'd long since lost count of how many girlfriends he'd had. They were all completely different from one another. Some were glamorous and confident. Some were bold and passionate. Some were shy and quiet. Others were graceful and elegant. The only thing they all had in common was that every single one of them was stunningly beautiful. There had even been a period when he openly dated two women at the same time. Both women knew about each other and had quietly accepted the arrangement. Cassian certainly knew how to enjoy life. If anyone could be said to have the best of both worlds, it was him. He was nothing like the Cassian I remembered. In my previous life, Cassian had been everyone's idea of the perfect husband. Handsome, wealthy, worth billions. Yet he'd never once been involved in a scandal. He had loved his wife faithfully until the very end. Whenever people voted online for the man they'd most want to marry, Cassian was always number one. I couldn't understand it. Could being reborn really change someone's personality that much? Because I hadn't changed. As far as I could tell, my personality, interests, habits, and abilities were almost exactly the same as before. Even the cranberry cookies I'd loved in my previous life were still my favorite now. So why had both Cassian and Caleb become completely different people? When it came to love, it was as if the two of them had switched places. In my previous life, Caleb had been the notorious playboy everyone knew. He never married and dated more women than anyone could count. He was effortlessly romantic and incredibly generous, chartering a luxury yacht for a girlfriend's birthday, flying across the world overnight to watch the northern lights together, covering an entire subway station wall with ads declaring his love. To him, those grand gestures came naturally. Women fell hopelessly in love with him. Even after they broke up, they still spoke fondly of him and never had a bad word to say. He moved from one romance to another without ever getting emotionally tied down. Back then, the company he and Cassian founded was called CC Games. Together, they were known online as the CC Twins. They were nearly as famous as top celebrities, each with an enormous fan base of devoted female admirers. But now, everything was the exact opposite. Chapter 9. Sometimes I think, if I'd had that dream about my previous life earlier, before I married Caleb, before I'd fallen deeply in love with him, I probably wouldn't have chosen to be with him. To protect myself, I would have stayed away from both him and Cassian. I would have made sure our lives never crossed again. But by the time those memories surfaced, I was already married. I was even pregnant. Everything Caleb and I had shared, from falling in love to getting married, had been real. He was nothing like the Caleb from my previous life. He wasn't a playboy. He didn't keep changing girlfriends. He was completely devoted to me. Other than me, there wasn't a single young woman around him. The love he gave me was something I felt every single day. And every instinct told me the same thing. The life I had now was a happy one. I wanted to keep living it. When our daughter, Stella, turned 3, Cassian began openly pursuing a famous actress. He spent lavishly on her, secured major opportunities for her career, invested in her projects, and never hesitated to spend money. It was hardly surprising that she fell in love with him. 6 months later, they got married. Their extravagant wedding dominated social media for more than a month. I remembered that actress from my previous life. She had once been the spokesperson for a game released by CC Games. She had even performed a song at one of the company's annual parties. But after that endorsement contract ended, it was never renewed, and she had no further connection with the company. I was certain there had never been anything unusual between her and Cassian. Thinking about it brought back another memory. Only then did I realize that, in my previous life, Caleb had dated a young actress as well. Back then, countless people online had been obsessed with them as a couple. Watching Caleb sitting on the floor building blocks with Stella, I casually asked, "Don't you ever envy Cassian?" He looked up innocently. Envy him for what? Everything he has. I have too, and I have things he doesn't. But his wife is a huge celebrity. Isn't that something to brag about? And before he got married, he dated so many gorgeous women. Isn't that every man's dream? I don't care what other men's dreams are, he answered proudly. My dream is simply to grow old happily with my wife. Do you know what people online say about you? I asked. They say you got married way too young. What a waste. He smiled without hesitation. No, marrying you while I was still young was the greatest honor of my life. The love in his eyes was so deep that I nearly drowned in it. Chapter 10. 3 years after getting married, Cassian got divorced. The reason? He couldn't stop flirting with other women, and his wife eventually found out. They argued almost every day for months before finally ending their marriage. After becoming single again, Cassian even threw a party to celebrate. He told Caleb, "I've been married once, and I've realized something. Being single is the happiest way to live." Then he raised his glass with a grin. "I live for the nightlife. Long live freedom." But his freedom didn't last long. After days of non-stop drinking and years of irregular eating habits, he was hospitalized with a perforated stomach ulcer. When Caleb and I went to visit him, I brought a thermos filled with homemade medicinal rice porridge. We had a housekeeper who handled most of the cooking, so my cooking skills weren't anything special. Still, I loved making soups and porridge. Healthy rice porridge was my specialty. It was light, flavorful, and gentle on the stomach. Whenever I got off work early or had the weekend free, I'd make a pot for the family. Both Caleb and our daughter always cleaned their bowls and showered me with compliments. I'd learned the recipe from my mom. It was also something I often made in my previous life. Cassian gladly finished the entire bowl. "Jane, this is delicious." He smiled. "The doctor said I should start eating lighter meals from now on. Would you mind teaching my housekeeper how to make this?" "Of course." I nodded. "Just send me your housekeeper's contact information." Not long after he was discharged from the hospital, Cassian suddenly bought the villa directly across from ours. Rumor had it he'd paid twice the market price to convince the previous owner to sell. After moving in, he started dropping by our house for dinner every now and then. When he showed up for dinner 4 times in a single week, Caleb finally snapped. "Cassian, what exactly is your problem? Don't you have your own house? Do you even know what a third wheel is? Seriously, take the hint." Cassian calmly took another spoonful of porridge. "The doctor told me I need to take good care of my stomach. That means eating on time." Caleb rolled his eyes. "Who's stopping you? Doesn't your housekeeper cook for you?" Cassian answered leisurely. "Yeah, but eating alone feels miserable. I lose my appetite." Caleb scoffed. "If you want company, all you have to do is snap your fingers. Plenty of beautiful women would line up to eat with you. It's not like you're short on dinner dates." Cassian sighed dramatically. "We were college roommates for 4 years. We built a company together after graduation. We've been brothers for over a decade. You have a wife. You have a daughter. Your life is complete. And now you're just going to abandon your poor, lonely brother?" He shook his head mournfully. "The world's a cold place. You really find out who your true friends are in hard times." Caleb kicked him under the table. "Are you done yet?" Cassian looked completely shameless. "Not a chance. Until my stomach fully recovers. I'm eating at your house." Chapter 11. Every evening after work, Cassian showed up at our house right on time for dinner. Afterward, he dragged Caleb out for a walk. He really had changed. He no longer dated anyone, and his nights of partying and nightlife were gone. Whenever people asked why, he'd simply shrug. "I'm getting old. I don't have the energy for that life anymore." Cassian ended up living across from us for years. As Caleb often complained, "This guy has absolutely no sense of boundaries. He treats our house like it's his own. His skin is thicker than a brick wall." Still, there was one thing no one could deny. Cassian adored Stella. Whatever she wanted, she got. He spoiled her without limits, even more than her own father did. He even joked, "I don't have kids anyway. When I'm gone, I'll leave my shares of CC Games to Stella. That way, she'll own the entire company." Of course, none of us took him seriously. Even though he didn't have children, he wasn't without family. Besides, the inheritance Stella would receive from us alone would already guarantee her a comfortable life. She didn't need anyone else's fortune. Stella had always been an outstanding student, and we placed great importance on teaching her independence. After graduating from high school, she applied to several prestigious universities overseas and was accepted by her dream school. Naturally, we worried about sending someone so young to another country alone. But in the end, we chose to respect her decision. She wanted to attend the university she'd always dreamed of, study the subject she loved, and work hard for the future she wanted. She had achieved her dream. How could we possibly stand in her way? Besides, whenever we missed her, it was only a flight of a dozen or so hours away. It wasn't impossible. We personally took Stella to campus before returning home. carrying nothing but hopes and blessings for her future. That winter break, I made a decision. I wanted to rent a guest house in South City for a month. I'd always loved South City. Its scenery, its climate, its culture. I'd visited many times before, but every trip had only lasted a few days. Every time I left, I wished I could stay longer. 4 years. I'd dreamed of living there for a while, but work, family, and raising Stella had always made that impossible. Now Stella was studying overseas. During the New Year holidays, only Caleb and I would be at home. When I brought it up, Caleb agreed without hesitation. I'll go with you. By then, the company had grown so successful that Caleb had achieved both financial freedom and the freedom to manage his own time. Spending a month away wasn't a problem. We started packing. Only 2 days before our departure did Cassian find out about our plans. He immediately insisted on coming with us. Caleb shot him down without hesitation. This is our trip, our time together. Cassian, could you please learn what personal space means? And another thing, your stomach recovered years ago. After we get back, stop coming over to freeload at our house. Cassian stared at him in disbelief. So you're dumping me now? You're both abandoning me? Caleb rubbed his forehead helplessly. Cassian, we're not responsible for you. And this won't just be South City. Jane and I are going to travel together more often from now on. It's something she's always wanted, and I want to be there with her. He paused before speaking more gently. You should find someone to share your life with too. I'm saying this because I genuinely care about you. You can't spend the rest of your life following us around. It's time you started thinking about your own future. Cassian froze. It was as though Caleb's words had struck him harder than anyone expected. He stood there silently, unable to say a single word. Chapter 12. That night, Caleb and I were about to head upstairs to bed when loud banging came from the front door. The moment we opened it, Cassian collapsed right in front of us. Completely drunk, Caleb hurried over to help him up. Cassian, what the hell are you doing? You've been sober for years. Are you seriously trying to destroy your health again? Dazed, Cassian leaned heavily against him and looked up at us with unfocused eyes. Then his gaze landed on me. He froze for a moment. Then he smiled. Wife, I've had too much to drink. Help me, will you? And I want the hangover soup you make. The color drained from Caleb's face. He grabbed Cassian and started dragging him toward the door. Have you lost your mind? Do you even know what you're saying? Watching the two of them, everything suddenly became clear. So, Cassian was the one who had been reborn. The way he called me wife, it was exactly the same as in my previous life. It seemed I'd been far more clueless than I'd realized. I'd thought I'd lived a happy life with Cassian. I'd believed we'd grown old together in happiness. But the moment he'd been given a second chance, he'd introduced me to his best friend instead. Perhaps the happiness I'd treasured had really been nothing more than wishful thinking on my part. Given another chance, he hadn't wanted to spend his life with me again. But that was all right. I'd already let it go. Now that I finally understood the truth, I wasn't heartbroken. I was simply at peace. Cassian struggled against Caleb while shouting. Caleb, why are you sticking your nose into this? My wife's not even mad at me. He turned toward me. Wife, I know you don't like it when I drink. I won't do it again. I'll listen to everything you say. Come help me, okay? Cassian, Caleb punched him square in the face. Shut up. That's my wife. My wife. Cassian rubbed his bruised cheek and frowned. Don't be ridiculous. She's obviously my wife. Caleb, you've been a lifelong bachelor. You've never even been married. Where'd you get a wife? Then he looked at me again. Wife, if you want to live in South City, if you want to travel the world, I'll go with you. I was wrong before. I was always too busy. I never made your dreams come true. Give me one more chance. Wherever you want to go, I'll go with you. Please? In my previous life, I'd had that dream too, but Cassian had never fulfilled it. He was always busy. There was always another meeting, another project, another responsibility. He never had the time. The moment those words left his mouth, Caleb punched him again. Shut the hell up. This time, Cassian lost his temper too. He swung back. Within seconds, the two of them were fighting. Stop it. I took a deep breath and rushed over to pull them apart. Just as I reached out, Caleb stopped first. He immediately turned, ran to me, and wrapped me tightly in his arms. Don't pay any attention to him. His arms were trembling. You're my wife. You married me. You chose to have our child. In this life, we promised we'd grow old together. You can't take it back. The previous life is over. It doesn't matter anymore. Hearing his words, I froze. Caleb had been reborn too. When did you figure it out? I looked into his eyes. That I'd regained my memories from my past life. The year of my birthday, when I saw the cranberry cookies you left on the table. I knew, in our past life, they were your favorite snack. You bought them all the time. But back then, you didn't try them until you traveled to Northeast China at 28. After that, you started ordering them online. In this life, though, you never made that trip. Yet those cookies suddenly appeared in our home years earlier. That's when I guessed you'd remembered your past life. Do you know how scared I was? I was terrified you'd go back to your husband from your previous life. I was afraid you'd leave me. But then you handed me the ultrasound and told me I was going to be a father. At that moment, I knew you'd chosen me. You'd let go of the past. I felt like the happiest man in the world. Clang! A loud noise came from the doorway. We turned and saw Cassian collapse to the floor. He struggled to his feet, looked at me with trembling lips, and stammered, Jane, why you? You remember your past life too? Then, you know everything. I nodded. Yes, I know. In my past life, I misunderstood you. You weren't happy. It must have been exhausting pretending for an entire lifetime. I'm sorry you had to go through that. No, Jane, that's not true. Cassian frantically shook his head. I wasn't suffering. And I wasn't pretending. Spending my whole life as your husband made me happy. Really, I never lied. It doesn't matter anymore. I took Caleb's hand. Those memories are too far away. I can barely remember them now. I have a new life. So please don't disturb us again. Okay. Cassian laughed and cried at the same time before stumbling away. Chapter 13. So, it was just those cookies? You recognized me because of a few cookies? I still couldn't believe it. And in my previous life, I really did try them for the first time during a trip to Northeast China. How come I don't remember that? All I remembered was that I'd loved those cranberry cookies in my previous life. I honestly couldn't remember how I'd fallen in love with them. I remember. Caleb smiled softly. I remember everything about you. You, in your previous life. That's right. I loved you. I started loving you in my previous life. To be more precise, I was deeply in love with you. I just kept it hidden. That's impossible. I never noticed. That's because you were happy. He smiled faintly. I didn't want to burden you. I didn't want to disturb your happiness. So I forced myself to bury those feelings. You have no idea how much self-control it took for me not to keep looking at you every time we met. When did you start loving me? Did Cassian know? Were all those girlfriends real? Were you really such a playboy? And you never married your whole life. Was that because of me? Caleb took my hand and led me to the sofa. He wrapped an arm around my shoulders, letting me rest my head against him before chuckling. That's a lot of questions. I'll answer them one by one. As Caleb spoke, I came to know a side of him I'd never seen in my previous life. He told me that the first time Cassian introduced me to him, he'd already been attracted to me. He said I was exactly his type. A round face, big round eyes, soft, gentle features. But because I was his best friend's girlfriend, he never allowed himself to think any further. As time passed, Cassian brought me along more and more often. The three of us gradually got to know each other better. Little by little, he fell deeper in love with me. He loved how quiet and easygoing I was. How I never fought over trivial things or competed with others. How I quietly devoted myself to the things I loved. One day, he went to visit Cassian. Before he even stepped inside, he happened to overhear our conversation at the front door. At the time, the company had reached a critical stage. Cassian and Caleb had invested every dollar they had into the project. They'd taken out bank loans and borrowed money from relatives and friends. It was the hardest period they'd ever gone through. Without hesitation, I handed Cassian my bank card. It contained every cent I had. My savings from work. The lucky money my parents had given me over the years. even the scholarship money I'd earned back in college. I smiled and told him, I know it's not much, but maybe it'll help, even if it's only a little. Chapter 14. I insisted that Cassian take the money. He finally accepted it, then asked me, what if this project fails? What if I go bankrupt and every penny you saved is gone too? I smiled. Then I'll keep working and earn it back. It's not like we'll starve. There's a way to live whether you're rich or poor. I'm not materialistic anyway. If we have to tighten our belts for a while, then we will. We're young. We're healthy. As long as we can work, we'll be just fine. Caleb said that. Hearing those words, he had never envied Cassian more. He wished he could find someone who truly loved him, someone willing to stand by him through both success and hardship. When Cassian and I got married, Caleb sincerely wished us a lifetime of happiness. Whenever he and Cassian returned from business trips together, I'd always be waiting at the airport to pick Cassian up. Watching the two of us leave together, Caleb had never felt lonelier. Back then, he dated one woman after another because he desperately wanted to find someone who truly suited him. But after spending some time with each girlfriend, he'd always realized she wasn't the one he was looking for. So they'd break up. There was never a single woman, he said, who made me want to get married. Whenever he and Cassian were developing a new project, they'd work endless overtime. I'd ask the housekeeper to prepare dinner and deliver it to their office. Our home was only a short distance from the company. Whenever they worked too late, Cassian would simply bring Caleb back to our house so he wouldn't waste time commuting. No matter how late they came home, even if I was already asleep, I'd still get up and ask, have you eaten yet? If they hadn't, I'd make something simple. Dumplings, noodles, egg-fried rice. Quick, comforting meals anyone could enjoy. Caleb smiled as he remembered. Having late-night meals at your house always felt like home. It was the kind of home I'd always wanted. He told me that the Cassian he had known wasn't actually as easygoing as people imagined. Back in college, Cassian had dated other women too. He argued with them often, and those relationships usually ended because they weren't compatible. Once, Caleb had asked him why he decided to marry me. Cassian's answer had been simple. Because we get along. We've never fought. Caleb laughed softly. I understood exactly what he meant. Someone like you. So gentle. So patient. You always respected your partner. You were understanding. You never threw tantrums or played emotional games. You didn't have any bad habits. How could anyone possibly end up fighting with you? Once, the four of us went on a trip together. We'd only been there for a day when the company suddenly ran into a major crisis. We had no choice but to rush back immediately. By the time we booked our tickets, business class was completely sold out. The only seats left were in economy. Cassian had always been used to flying business class. It had been years since he'd flown economy. That day's flight was especially crowded. The packed cabin, the canceled vacation, and the emergency at the company had already pushed his patience to the limit. Then the child sitting in front of us started crying and screaming nonstop. Cassian was seconds away from exploding. I quietly reached over and took his hand. Without saying a word, I looked at him, silently asking him to stay calm. Then I pulled a small plush toy out of my bag. I played with the little boy and started telling him stories. Before long, he stopped crying. He behaved for the rest of the flight. Caleb smiled. I was sitting right beside you when I watched you telling stories to that little boy. With that gentle expression on your face, the whole world suddenly felt softer. If I'd been your boyfriend, I would have calmed down just like Cassian did, no matter how angry I was. Chapter 15. The whole world felt softer? I shot Caleb a sideways glance. Come on, isn't that a little exaggerated? He nodded with complete seriousness and gently pinched my cheek. You have no idea what kind of effect you have on people. Only those close to you can feel it. You're like a constant star. You make people feel safe. Like no matter what happens, you'll always be there. No matter when someone turns around, you're standing there with a smile. The longer you're with someone like that, the easier it is to fall hopelessly in love with you. I laughed and shook my head. Stop teasing me. If I really had that kind of magic, why didn't Cassian choose to spend this life with me? Because he didn't realize what he had. Caleb smiled bitterly. He had you for so long that he gradually forgot how precious you were. He was too close to see it. I was the outsider, and you have no idea how jealous I was. As time passed, I found myself falling deeper and deeper for you. I became obsessed. My mind was filled with thoughts of you. I kept imagining what it would be like if you were my wife. I was terrified that the two of you would discover my feelings, so I deliberately dated women very publicly. I went all out with grand romantic gestures. I wanted the whole world to see. The truth was, I kept changing girlfriends because I was trying to forget you. I genuinely wanted to find someone I could marry, but I never found her. So that's why you never got married? I asked quietly. That's right. He nodded. If I couldn't give someone my whole heart, then marrying her wouldn't have been fair. I had no right to waste someone else's life. Caleb. I gently held his chin and looked straight into his eyes. You're an incredible actor. I never noticed how you felt about me. He laughed. My previous life wasn't easy. I spent my entire life secretly loving someone I could never have. But fate was kind to me. It gave me another chance. He smiled proudly. At first, I thought that this time, Cassian and I would meet you at the same time. I wanted us to compete fairly. But when his aunt sent him your photo, he hesitated, and then he decided to turn down the blind date. Luckily, I happened to be sitting right beside him. The moment I heard what he planned to do, I stopped him. That's when I knew. He had been reborn too, and he'd already decided not to be with you again in this life. I was overjoyed. I knew my chance had finally come. So I told Cassian I'd fallen in love with you at first sight, and begged him to introduce us. I hesitated before asking the question that had lingered in my heart. After all these years of living with me, was I really everything you'd imagined? You know, sometimes people spend years longing for something. They dream about it every day. But once they finally have it, it's not nearly as wonderful as they imagined. Caleb, have you ever regretted marrying me? After all, I was just an ordinary woman. I'd never believed there was anything particularly special about me. Caleb gently wiped away the tears on my cheeks. Then, looking straight into my eyes, he spoke slowly, one word at a time. Never. You've never disappointed me. You're even more wonderful than I ever imagined. So wonderful, that I'm always afraid. Afraid that one day you'll leave me. If I'd never had you, perhaps I could have accepted it. But after having you, after knowing what that happiness feels like, if I ever lost you, it would destroy me. Jane, it has been the greatest honor of my life to walk through this life by your side. Chapter 16. Caleb and I had packed our luggage and were about to leave for South City when Cassian stopped us. Go. Caleb looked at me calmly. If you don't have this conversation with him, he won't let it go. You don't mind? I asked. He smiled. In this life, I'm the lucky one, so I can afford to be generous. Cassian and I sat across from each other in a cafe outside our neighborhood. After a long silence, he finally spoke. I'm sorry, Jane. His eyes were filled with pain. I ruined everything. My life in this lifetime has become a complete mess. You don't have to apologize. My voice was calm. I've had a good life in this one. Please. His voice turned hoarse. Don't talk to me like that. I'd rather you blamed me. I'd rather you hated me. Anything is better than this. I'm a terrible person, a fool who never appreciated what he had. So, I looked at him quietly. You didn't really love me in our previous life? Was our happy marriage just an act? No. He shook his head immediately. I loved you. Our happiness was real. But people are greedy. We get used to what we have. We stop appreciating it. And we start envying other people's lives. In everyone's eyes, I had it all. My career was thriving. My wife was gentle and wonderful. My son was smart and responsible. My life was perfect. But people are never satisfied. I envied Caleb. He didn't have the responsibilities of a family. He was free. He lived the life so many men dream about. Money, beautiful women. He could drink the strongest liquor. He could date the hottest women. He could spend days and nights partying on luxury yachts. He could burn money without a second thought. He could live exactly as he pleased. But I couldn't. I had a family. I had responsibilities. I also had a reputation to protect. He let out a bitter laugh. Sometimes, I even wished you weren't such a wonderful wife. I wished you were lazy, that you refused to work and depended entirely on me, or that all you cared about was shopping, beauty treatments, and luxury brands, or that you constantly sided with your own family, or even that you kept a younger lover while spending every night in bars and nightclubs. If you'd been that kind of woman, I could have gone out and lived recklessly without feeling guilty. But you were too good. So good that I couldn't find a single fault in you. So good that I couldn't bear to hurt you. You were gentle, but you also had principles. You knew exactly where your boundaries were. I knew. The moment I crossed the line, you would have walked away without looking back. The outside world tempted me, but I couldn't risk losing you. I wasn't willing to gamble, so I buried those desires. And I kept burying them, for an entire lifetime. When I died with regrets. There were still so many experiences waiting for me. I had the ability to live that life, but I gave it all up. I never imagined I'd actually be given another chance. I woke up just after graduating from college. Everything was starting over, so I decided, this time, I would live a completely different life. I wanted freedom. I wanted excitement. I wanted to make up for every regret I'd left behind. Chapter 17. Back then, I was going to turn down my aunt's blind date arrangement, but then Caleb saw your photo and said he'd fallen in love with you at first sight. He was my best friend. At the time, he hadn't dated a single woman yet. He wasn't the playboy he would later become. I had no reason to refuse him. I figured it was only one meeting. Maybe you wouldn't even like him, and even if you two started dating, once his true colors came out, I thought you'd eventually leave him. What I never expected was that Caleb had been reborn too. He'd already fallen in love with you in our previous life. You two fell deeply in love. You got married soon afterward, and you built a happy life together. Something about it bothered me. I couldn't explain why. I was living the life I'd always dreamed of. I had all the money I could spend. I dated every type of beautiful woman. That actress I'd secretly admired in my previous life but never pursued. This time, I openly chased her. I even married her. But after we got married, I still couldn't settle down. My heart kept wandering. I cheated on her without feeling guilty. When she asked for a divorce, I felt relieved. I agreed immediately. He lowered his head. The day I was hospitalized because of my stomach, you brought me that bowl of porridge. The same healthy porridge you'd made for me countless times in my previous life. The moment I tasted it, that familiar feeling of happiness came rushing back. Only then did I finally realize I'd truly lost you. There would never again be any chance for us. You belonged completely to another man. Even getting to eat a bowl of porridge you'd cooked had become a luxury. I started to panic. I was terrified we'd drift farther and farther apart, so I shamelessly invited myself over for dinner every day. That warm feeling of family, that quiet happiness, the ordinary life I'd once taken for granted. I could never have it again. I know barging into your lives every day was rude. I know I shouldn't have done it, but I couldn't stop. I'd already lost my mind. I looked calmly at the exhausted man sitting across from me. You're an adult. You have to take responsibility for the choices you make. The life you're living now is the one you chose. So you'll have to keep walking that path. But, his voice trembled, I don't know how much longer I can hold on. That has nothing to do with me. I stood up. All choices come with gains and losses. The moment you chose freedom, you also chose to let me go. You've always known that. Life doesn't give us the chance to go back. So look ahead, Cassian. Compared to most people still struggling just to survive, you're already far happier than you realize. As I walked out of the cafe, I saw Caleb waiting for me in the distance. Smiling, I ran straight into his arms. Chapter 18. In my previous life, I married Cassian. My mom always said I was the kind of fool who stumbles into good fortune. She'd say Cassian was handsome, talented, successful, and loyal to his family. He was more than good enough for someone like me. In this life, I married Caleb. And my mom said exactly the same thing. She said a man as successful as Caleb, who spoiled me without limits, must have come into my life because I'd saved the galaxy in my previous life. I used to believe that too. I thought I was just an ordinary woman who had gotten incredibly lucky to find such an amazing and faithful husband. But now I know better. The reason I've had a happy life isn't just because I was lucky. It's because I've always known how to live with a clear heart. I'm sincere with the people I love. When I love someone, I give them my whole heart without holding anything back. But I also have my own boundaries and principles. I make it clear that I deserve the same love I give, and my love leaves no room for betrayal. The moment someone hurts me, I'll walk away without hesitation. I choose to face life with optimism. I work hard, cherish every day, and greet each new morning with enthusiasm. I share that happiness with the people around me. I'm emotionally steady. I don't lose my temper for no reason. When problems arise, I don't waste time complaining. I solve them, because I believe anger has never solved anything. Instead, I choose to inspire the people around me through the way I live. I'm not because I'm a fool who got lucky. I'm a good person, and I deserve to be loved.